from a stint of repose, I came back. Pleased to see you again. So I'm afraid how you enjoy this class. It is a adventuresome but a little insipid over distinctive areas of legal study. So I fervent on essential courses for by exam or other midterm subjects. So I have to sorry that you probably have to constrain yourself from outdoor activities or other present times with your peers and other family members. Is it so? Is to be ordinate and organized to prepare for the midterm exam. I'm sure of your great result. Okay, let's get further to explore briefly solicitors and barristers. Context is interesting, and it is a little entrenched in fashion of a dealings. I just see the report of Royal Commission in 1979 has yet to see if the division is proper between solicitors and barristers. So the tendency of fusion is very limited in the context. But I see that it's not always desirable to make fusion, since they undertake a unique role to address the socialists in the same context of English legal tradition. So that feature will be investigated briefly. The origin of the solicitor is less elitist than that of the barrister, and the solicitor's work has been less romanticized than the trial advocacy of the wicked and robbed barrister. Attorneys who work directly with clients, preparing litigation for disputes before the King's Bench and common pleas courts, usually did not possess the educational level of barristers, nor did they present the actual cases in court. The role of advocate was carefully protected by the barristers. The term solicitor initially applied to an attorney appealing in the Chancery Court. The same role was called a proctor before the Admiralty and Ecclesiastical Courts. These attorneys, solicitors and proctors, or later called solicitors, were jointly housed with barristers in the Inns of Court. But the solicitors were ejected in the late 16th century and organized their own association. Solicitors outnumber barristers 7-1. The more than 40,000 practicing and employed solicitors in the United Kingdom are not as concentrated in London as are the barristers. Solicitors practicing in London do not have their offices within the monastic chambers like the barristers in court. The solicitor has contact with the public, and his location reflects this contact, while the barrister, who does not work directly with the public but only with solicitors, may work in a location less accessible to the public. Oh, this one should present it. The life of the solicitor is, on the whole, more relaxed than the baristas, though the solicitor is less apt to achieve the fame accessible to successful barrister, which may culminate in appointment to the bench. The solicitor may reach the heights of compensation of most successful barrister, however, and an average solicitor is more likely to achieve a comfortable financial position than his counterpart at the bar. Some new solicitors choose to accept a salary position with the government authority or in industry, but the majority seek employment with the form of a solicitor. Solicitors, like the United States lawyers, may have their offices in large cities or in tiny hamlets. It is choice not facing the barrister, whose decision is whether to practice from chambers in London or to have chambers in one of the other principal cities in England or Wales. So the geographical distribution comes in different way between both professions. Expectation of partnership after some years as a salaried associate parallels the participation in law firm in the United States. Although the solicitor is expected to buy into the partnership, and unless he has sufficient resources, he may have to remain a salaried employee. A solicitor who is a partner in a large and well-known firm may expect sizable financial rewards and also will benefit from the work of his article clerks, assistant solicitors, and junior partners. Large firms, nevertheless, are the exception. Most solicitors practice alone or in a small group. The solicitor traditionally has been a law office practitioner, advising clients on legal and often personal and business matters. He does accompany his associate barrister at court to assist in trial, but the role of courtroom adversary is preserved and protected by the barristers. More recently, solicitors have gained authority to act as advocates in the lower courts. They appear in magistrate courts, in county courts, and in limited circumstances approved by the Lord Chancellor in criminal matters before the Crown Courts. They are chipping away at the boundaries of the barrister preserve, and there is tension between the two professions of which the public largely is unaware. The work of the solicitor is concentrated in the areas of conveyancing and estate law, in advising on business matters, and for some litigation preparation, and in the lower courts some advocacy. In the major cities, large firms of solicitors often concentrate on advice to industry. They're quite similar to large firms in the United States, with the exception of refraining from the advocacy jurisdiction of the barrister. The practice of solicitor has changed in small degrees, and like the barrister, the solicitor had carefully preserved his lucrative monopoly powers. The 1979 Royal Commission study of professions suggests the solicitors be permitted to engage in limited advertising of their skills. So it is one issue argue seriously over the ethics of legal profession. Advertising is adequate or not. So there are a set of rules developed by Court of the United States, and also it involves a kind of freedom of speech concern, which is usually not frequently in the area of concerns. So freedom of speech, also Part 3, deals with the question arising from the commercial context. It is debated, but it is not purely commercial in nature, since the legal profession possesses the quality and some extent of a public responsibility. The report nevertheless did not recommend any change in one area that has been strongly criticized for years: the monopoly which solicitors possess on property conveyancing, which guarantees a continued high cost to the public for the transfer of their property, although in exchange for an assurance of expertise in transaction. Solicitors have rigidly protected their conveyancing monopoly because it is the largest contributor to most solicitors' incomes, and because fees for many other labors of solicitor, particularly litigation, have not increased with inflation. If the main criticism of barristers is that their separation from the solicitors creates excessive fees, then the main concern of solicitors is their tenacious retention of monopoly of conveyancing. So we have some same context of similarities as compared to the Korean practice, but that is not exactly the same in some points. For example, the solicitors may be qualified to become a judge, even as limited to the lawyer position. So we'll have some further understanding from Samson. The English have long prided themselves on being less lawyer-ridden than most countries. They have about 840 lawyers for every million people, compared to about 1,500 in the United States. But English lawyers have been increasing rapidly. There were only 25,000 solicitors in England and Wales in 1960, but 41,000 in 1982. What is so many find to do? Asked the president of the Law Society, Jonathan Clark, in 1980. But many clients were worried that they would find it all too easy to spin out the time, lovingly exchanging long-winded letters while the clock ticks up their fees. Solicitors have become increasingly defensive in maintaining a monopoly of man jobs, which could be done by less qualified people. They even mounted an extravagant advertising campaign paid for by a special solicitor's levy to warn the public about the dangers of using a non-solicitor. What? This name. They fought hard to defend their most lucrative and leisure business, the conveyancing of houses, which accounts for half of their income and which employs expensive solicitors for work that can be done by secretaries or clerks. But the conservatism and defensiveness of profession have also limited its future. The ablest solicitors have tended to gravitate towards the big law firms, such as Slaughter and May or Linklaters and Baines, which have huge scope in advising big corporations. So you also can see the articles heralding a expansion of law firms from England into the Korean jurisdiction. So it is a point of dealings and also required by law, along with the free trade agreements. WTO service trade requires to open the market of legal profession, which is available in a limited context to the foreign firms. And so it is one way to interchange and make a business to flourish the liberal dynamism of market. But unfortunately, there is some stalemate about a specific agreements dealing with the scope of a service trade in the international context. So So it is a dilemma now presented in the context of WTO regime. There is one way to save the preserve of authority to garner the three pillars: a good trade, a service trade, and intellectual property issue, which was finalized in establishing the TRIPS agreement. The service agreement, which what I call a GUTS, a General Agreement on Trade of Service, are never a complete form of a international convention, which is packed to be a complement with further specific agreement of each member state, which would be a interchange in the context of offer and take methods. But how do you agree if most nations actually face some difficulties in completely opening the service market? There are intrinsically inextricable to get the issues all the way free from complicacies. In some, actually, it is difficult since they have distinct elements. They have distinct elements of labor. So mobility of labor also concerned about a liberalization of a service market. So many domestic laws should be fundamentally reframed to respond to the needs of a service market, but that is not each case in any way. So it is desirable to house the bigger forms of a English origin and to interact, which is helpful to provide the quality of legal services in the Korean context. How do you agree? The solicitor profession has, however, been so engrossed in its past that it has allowed the upstart accountants to move into most profitable corporate regions, advising on financial control and taxation. So it is normal thing in the law form that the work division is arranged to cover the accountant service. So they interact to address the legal controversy and in the context of the firm management. Solicitors are self-governed through their professional organization, the Law Society. Membership is voluntary, but about 80% join. The Law Society establishes standards for the education of solicitors and disciplines them when errant. It is as conservative as the Inns Code in defending the domain of solicitor, but also has promoted the successful encroachment of solicitor into some of the territory of the barrister, including advocacy before the county courts and to limit degree in the crown courts. So in next, move to preserve barristers. So you see one attracting face. There are new institutions in England more tradition-bound than that of some 3,000 practicing barristers. Isolated in the Inns of Court, barristers view with a mixture of alarm and disdain any encroachment on their domain by the large group of solicitors. The 1979 Royal Commission report brought a breath of relief to the barristers. It recommended a perpetuation of division of the profession. So you are led to a scope of inns, what I call Gray's Inn, Lincoln's Inn, Inner Temple, Surgeon's Inn, or the Basin, to breed the prospective barristers in England. So, what is the law machine? So, briefed by Dyer, useful. No one knows exactly when the 4 Inns of Court were established. They were already a going concern in the 14th century, originally medieval guilds of lawyers. They appear to have served as residential clubs for lawyers and places where students came to learn the law. Stepping from the bustle of Fleet Street into courtyards and lawns of Temple is like taking a trip backwards in time. Though some of the buildings are post-war, rebuilt following bomb damage, the new blends inconspicuously with the old, leaving an impression of beautiful but cloistered and anachronistic world. Lord Gifford, whose chambers are an exception, located not in the inns but in an ordinary office building in Covent Garden, finds the atmosphere of the inns attractive but very corrupting. What are the words from Lord Gifford? Barristers who operate from London spend their whole working life either in that little person, the little enclave of the Inns of Court, or they go into courts which themselves are very artificial theaters cut off from the real world. And when you think that the number of people we are talking about have spent their ill life anyway in some way set apart, they may have been to public schools or they may have been to old university. It enhances this feeling that we are something special, something above the rest, some special breed of being. The inns brought together aspiring advocates to live and work. The members of the bar help practice court sessions or moves and closely counsel the professional, spiritual, and personal development of the fledgling barristers. The result was an unusual personal closeness and a professional unity, which, through the process of judicial selection, also characterized the bench. Pressures of space ultimately reduced the inns to offices for barristers, halls for dining, and residences for benchers. The Inns of Court enter a barrister's life before his call to the bar. If a university student aspires to life at the bar, he will begin his association by joining an inn and commencing to consume the mandatory dinners, his first introduction to the ancient peculiarities of the life of barrister. One of the inns will eventually become his working habitat if he is fortunate enough to find both pupils and later chambers of his own, and if he remains in London, where by far the largest concentration of barristers sequester themselves. There is nothing comparable to the inns in other common law systems. And also, we have some inside views which describe the context of a ends of code. It is from a Samson. Of all British subgroups, they remain the most arcane and segregated. More than half work in a tiny area of London, half a mile across, in one of 4 inns of code where they can lunch along wooden benches in hammer-beam halls as in a public school or an Oxbridge college. You can recognize a law student at the end of first year. One experienced QC assured me as much as a divinity student. They've been already acquired a special respect for authority. The oldest and richest inn is the Inner Temple, alongside a round Saxon church, which has produced most judges, and is more exclusive than the Middle Temple next door. Across the road, Lincoln's Inn is frequented by Transley lawyers. Gray's Inn, the newest, had a long decline after its heyday in the 16th century, but has more recently produced a good crop of judges. The inns have retained more completely than Oxbridge colleges their ancient autonomy and privileges. The Constitution was described by Sir Frederick Pollock in 1922 as a survival of medieval republican oligarchy, the purest, I should think, to be found in Europe. And it has not changed much since, for the inns have refused to delegate real power to the barrister professional body, the Bar Council. During the heyday of Victorian reformers in the 1860s and 1870s, they resisted pressures much more successfully than Parliament, universities, the civil service, or the army. They refused to change their constitutions and provide a system of legal education, and they remain today uncontrolled by any statute. They are ruled by their benches, the self-perpetuating senior lawyers who sit at high table, and their wealth remains secret, since they are exempted from publishing accounts. So, they enjoy exemption from a public duty to disclose their accounts, and it is not rare, but usually most democratic states arrange some statutes which requires to respect. For example, we have a provision, the all scope of a tripartite branches are obligated to let the assets or accounts to public notice. And usually a public administration, including jurists, need to seriously accept the kind of requirement arising from the government ethics, how they perceive. But it is also subject to some delicacies, case by case, that is present in the context of British judicial officers, which is founded on some reasons. In England, many advocate removal of distinction between the barrister and the solicitor. As expected, the barristers reject such a move, while the solicitors tend to favor fusion. They wish to gain access to all of the courts. The discussion of fusion is useful in considering whether a split or fused profession offers better legal services. It remains a controversial issue, even though the Royal Commission on Legal Services in 1979 advised against the fusion of two roles. And now we brief on the points of a suggestion advised by Lawyer Commission on Legal Services. Some might argue that our entire system of justice should be changed so that it resembles the other systems we have mentioned. Our task, in any event, was to examine the organization of profession on the basis of present legal system and the present rules of court procedure. In the system, the quality of advocacy remains an essential component of the quality of justice. Even if our system were modified so that less was done by means of spoken word, it will not follow that the quality of advocacy will cease to have importance. In the United States, judges of the superior courts have, in their law clerks, professional assistants of high quality. A great deal of legal argument is committed to paper in the formal briefs. In those circumstances, it might be so that the standard of advocacy would be a matter of less concern. The contrary is the case. The Honorable Wallenberger, Chief Justice of the United States of America, told us in oral evidence of his concern for the standards of advocacy in its jurisdiction and of difficulties which arose from advocacy of poor quality. He said, "My observation from sitting in trial of cases in the niche appeals court was that something less than half of the lawyers who appeared they were minimally qualified to perform their function. Over a long period of time, I undertook to take soundings in state courts and federal courts throughout the country, and the most pessimistic view was that only 25% of lawyers appearing in our courts were ready qualified to represent the clients properly and to move the case along adequately. Some judges placed it as high as 75%. So, kind of a soundtrack was tape recorded for a research purpose. I'm not sure. Somewhere in the midway mark is probably correct, and it will vary to some extent from place to a place. The Chief Justice remarked that cases were dealt with in British courts more quickly than in American, and went on. From time to time, I've been asked how I account for this. It is not easy to account for it, but an oversimplification, perhaps, is that in your court, generally you have 3 experts who have all been trained in the same tradition and the same pattern. The judge almost by definition has been one of the leading members of the bar, and the 2 advocates appearing before him are trained the same way the judge was trained. This is not so on our side. So, we really are happy on the government practices usually. We have some of checkup devices to monitor the practice of judges, and in the previous article I've read some judges who committed misconduct by abusive words or some kind of so. That is one way to support the democratic governance. And usually the judges are placed in a leading position who expect to keep on the record protocol, and also make an issue relevant to resolve the case, and their guides and from leadership is important, actually, to make the case more justiciable and produce a better justice over cases. I'm not sure, but most Korean judges well take their role as expected, except some unusual cases, which is occasionally reported in newspaper. How do you agree? The trial of case resembles, in a way, a three-leg stool. If any one of the legs is very much shorter than the other, you have not got a very good stool. If any one of them is weaker than the other, the stool might collapse if weight is put on it. In our system, unfortunately, too often all three of the legs of stool are not as competent as they should be. So in the current context, we have many conscientious judges and professionally cultivated. So even the use of judges are well tailored to perform the expected function. But now we have also the point of reform in the practice of recruitment of judges. So we now become assimilative to follow the practice of United States and English. So if you are a graduate of a law school in Korea, you now have no direct way to be immediately placed as judge. You have to undertake some years of a clerkship by means of a statutory requirement. So you are expected to comply with the any other but the context is a little distinctive to say the recruitment is essentially preserved within the authority of judiciary itself. So independence of judiciary was once controverted or seriously debated in the context of a Korean democracy. But paradoxically, with the some practices of a judicial post in the United States are different, since the context involves a massive extent of a political element. So the posting of judges often based on a election, local election, or appointment of governors, and the federal judge are required to be appointed by a president. So paradoxically, the political context is more prominent in the U.S. practices, unlike the Korea. So we have much enhanced form of judicial practices which impose many prongs of desirables from various countries. So system was intermixed. That is one point of advantages, but also may militate against some practices in some cases. A notable example may be found in Japanese context. Now, the law schools in Japanese, which was reformed about decades ago, encountered this serious challenge where many law schools now push to discontinue the education business. I'm not sure, but that is not the case in Korea, I expect. Even if you have a very experienced judge and he has two medical, bad trained or untrained advocates before him, he has difficulty. So what is the attitude of profession? Members of both branches find some advantages in fused profession. Forms of solicitors, particularly the larger, could expect to gain materially and in prestige by having as partners barristers who were the acknowledged leaders in various fields. Barristers, particularly those in lower and middle ranges of income, might earn in a solicitor's firm as much as more than they could at the bar, with the additional advantages of greater security and provision for retirement. So there is one way of a survival strategy. So interplay between different two divisions may not exacerbate the serious consequence about deprivation, but what I say is to some form of cooperative to enhance the quality of legal service, and also may efficiently address the financial issues in this seriously depraved condition of economy. How do you agree? So, but that should not misunderstood, as we see in a Korean practice. For example, what do you mean by excessive remuneration of a retired high bureaucrats, notwithstanding the executive or judiciary? That should be surely excluded from our concern. I mean, just the context of a practitioners between two divisions, and also the context of a Korean practices. There is a point of suspicion the Korean public usually raised in the context of corruption or a government ethics, as I've said. In spite of these advantages, the weight of evidence from both branches of profession is opposed to fusion. What if the start of professional practice would be easier in a fused profession than now it is at the bar? So there is a delicate point between the fusion and some point of a separation. So, what are the main criticisms? Of the many witnesses who submitted evidence on the structure of the profession, small minority advocated a fusion. These witnesses put forward three main criticisms of the two-branch profession. That was inefficient, harmed the confidence of clients, and was more expensive. It was argued that these defects could be cured by creation of fused profession. Let's see the point of efficiency. The efficiency of two-branch profession was criticized on the grounds that the structure caused failures in communication and was source of a delay. Failure in communication was said to arise because the professional relationship between barrister and solicitor was distant and formal, because the written instructions sent to counsel were in some cases inadequate and late in arriving, and because barristers were reluctant to complain about inadequate instructions for fear of offending a solicitor client. There was also said to be poor service when a brief was returned by a barrister at a late stage, because the barrister to whom it was reallocated had insufficient time to make himself familiar with the case and with the client. Problems of communication would not arise if the advocate in a case personally undertook the necessary preparatory work. We doubt whether, even in a fused profession, this could be done as a matter of regular practice, except in minor cases. If a partner in a firm of either have to refer the client to another firm or undertake the advocacy himself, whether or not he was able or satisfactory to do so. If the case were referred to another firm to act as agents for advocacy alone, the criticisms of the present system, such as the cost of employing two lawyers and the need for one to brief the other, would apply. The cost could be expected to be higher because, as I pointed out in paragraph, solicitors' overhead expenses are appreciably higher than barristers. Moreover, it would be more difficult to obtain the services of a suitable advocate from amongst those employed in firms of solicitors, because their dispersal would complicate the process of selection, and because the chosen advocate might prefer quite properly to give priority to the existing clients of his own firm. This could lead to the undesirable situation that because only those litigants who retain the services of a large firm with advocacy partners would be assured of an advocacy service of the highest standard. There would be greater disparity than at present in the standards of advocacy on either side in cases coming before the court. Even if it were desirable to do so, a solicitor might be reluctant to refer client to another firm because of the risk that he would permanently lose the client. A solicitor who himself favored fusion told us, in answer to the point, that in a fused profession, a firm which was not large enough to employ its own specialists would have to refer clients to large firms. So, that is one of the arguments against my whole ethos, because it sounds the warming knell, if not the death knell, of small firm of provincial solicitors. I can see the argument that the small firm will send the client with the difficult case, the large specialist firm. The practical result of that, in certain cases, will be that they will lose the client forever. That has happened. And the Commission also addressed the issue about the selection of judges. Nearly all the judges are recruited from among the senior members of the bar, although it has recently become possible for a solicitor who has served as a recorder for 3 years to be appointed a circuit judge, and 9 solicitors have been so appointed. The Law Chancellor's Department stressed to us that it is necessary for the Law Chancellor to have the fullest possible information about candidates for appointment to judicial office. This is available on the present system because the number of practicing barristers is not great, because their talents were well known in the profession are often on public display, and because the Law Chancellor and his senior advisors are likely to have personal knowledge of most senior members of the bar. Fusion would increase the numbers available for consideration, but might increase the possibility of making an unsuitable choice. So we reached the final point about the effect of present trends. What is the effect if we continue on this practice? Because of growing trend towards specialization and the need at all levels for effective advocacy, we think it likely that if the profession were fused, there would be a demand for the kind of service which is now provided by the bar. This is visualized by those who support fusion, one of whom Mr. Huxley said in evidence. In my submission, there must be, even if one has a fusion, a rump of the bar. Call it what you will, there will be some kind of lump advocacy labor, in other words, a pool on which one can draw for a particular case that has to exist, even under fused system. This view is supported by experience in other jurisdictions, in particular New Zealand and Australia. When the legal profession began to operate in these countries, the distances which practitioners had to travel were often considerable. Communications were bad and slow, and the countries were sparsely inhabited. In these conditions, no separate bars were established. In more recent times, specialist bars have developed in order to meet an increasing demand for specialization in the practice of law. So it is as early as in 1979, and that demand also is seriously made across our judicial professions. Specialization is important and a strategic point to enhance the legal quality of legal service. So lawyers need to have undertake more education, which enables them to be specialists in some areas of practice. For example, some lawyer may have more knowledge to address the medical malpractice, or in other cases, admiral law may be available for some more studious lawyers to make them more eligible about the area of law. So that serves in both ways. It increases the area of practice, which contributes as one of income source. Also, that affects enhancement of a quality service, I suppose. How do you agree? The results are said to have been beneficial. The Chief Justice of Australia, in oral evidence, made the following comment. Chief Justice, you said that some of the states which were originally fused have become divided, and you have seen this happen. As a consequence of division, do you think that the quality of advocacy has improved? Yes, it has. That I can say. I watched these bars grow in my time as a practicing man, but even more so since I've been in this office, which I've now held for 13 years. So we now also return to the previous dealings about parliament system. As you were introduced, it is distinct in understanding the judicial role in or its competence in the context of a political framework. It is so parliamentary supremacy usually assumed to represent the typicals of a British politics, but we never say any judicial supremacy, unlike the United States institutions. But they are so conservative to preserve, on the other hand, the tradition of a medieval republic oligarchy. So it is surely in some distinct flavor about the ways of framework. And the Royal Commission, for example, undertake some upstage investigation to address the institutional overhaul, or in some cases in some cases overall, but largely some progressive form of reformation to address the public needs. So the context is delicate, but their prestige is normally higher than civil nations. For example, in contrast to France or Germany. But the initiative is normally more superior in the context of parliamentary intervention. So with the context of royal commission, which collects the evidence pertinent to address the changing needs. And the command is very decisive in actuality to shape the institution. But that is not the case usually in the counterpart, United States. So the basic point is also relevant in my submission, that the strict nature of a tripartite system founded on separation of power principle, as espoused by Montesquieu, as I've introduced, have also some point of impact in terms of a legal profession. And so, in New Zealand, a number of lawyers practice as barristers, although the profession is not formally divided. The former Chief Justice, the late Sir Richard Weil, expressed the view in oral evidence the formal division on the British pattern was unlikely. Whilst agreeing that the system worked well in New Zealand, his colleague Sir Loving Cook, a judge of New Zealand Court of Appeal, who was the first lawyer in the country to practice as a barrister from the start of his professional career, said, so, I'm one of those who does subscribe to this concept of separate power, and I make no secret of the fact that I think it is one of the great British achievements to have evolved such a system or institution. One would be somewhat dismayed to find in the country of its birth it was either abolished or radically altered. I think that the idea of an independent body of men and women, specialists and skilled in the type of legal service, and not mere paid agents for the clients, but recognizing that they owe some responsibility to the cause, and having the confidence of the cause and the standard of ethics and professional skill that tends to go with that, is an extremely valuable concept, and long may they continue. So, we now have a closing remark. In light of all of the considerations set out above, we have reached the following conclusions. We consider it likely that in a fused profession there will be an acceptable reduction in the number and spread of smaller forms of solicitors and an increase in the protection of large city forms. This would accentuate present uneven distribution of solicitors and reduce the choice and availability of legal services. We are satisfied that in the future there will be a greater need for specialization. Fusion would disperse the specialist service which is now provided by the bar, and we consider that this would operate against the public interest. In large form, with an advocate partner, there will be readier communication than is usual between solicitor and barrister. But this advantage would not be realized in the fused profession to the extent they prove necessary for the smaller form to refer its citizens to large forms for advocacy a service. In terms of cost, it is difficult to make accurate estimates because they depend heavily on assumptions. On balance, we believe that in small cases there might be some saving, but that in the large cases this will not be so and the expense might be greater. With regard to the administration of justice, the weight of evidence is strongly to the effect that a two-branch profession is more likely than a fused one to ensure the high quality of advocacy, which is indispensable so long as our system remains in its present form to secure the proper quality of justice. These considerations lead us to the unanimous conclusion that it is in the public interest for the legal profession to be organized as at present in two branches. So now I complete all the topics we have to cover in this class. But some supporting ideas were presented by Bosch and staff. There will be the work for the next class. And the final topic in this rubric comes of judiciary, which to be brief, as scheduled on class progress, and for the 2 weeks on common law tradition, we expect to explore the procedure in England and sources of law, which I think is most essential to understand the nature of a British common law tradition. So that will be all for the class, and meet you again on Friday this week.